Welcome to the Wine Lab. I'm Andreea, and today we are talking about something in wine that can be harder to describe than aroma or flavor, but that shapes the entire drinking experience. Texture. I should tell you right away, this episode is a little longer than usual. But texture is one of the most fascinating parts of wine, and once you start noticing it, you cannot unnotice it. So stay with me. It is worth the extra few minutes. When we talk about wine, we often reach first for aroma. We say blackberry, citrus, vanilla, rose, smoke, herbs, stone fruit. Then we talk about taste. Sweet, sour, bitter, maybe salty in some cases. But wine is physical too. It has weight, grip, smoothness, heat, freshness, creaminess, sharpness, and sometimes a drying sensation that makes your gums feel very aware of themselves. That is mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is the collection of tactile sensations a wine produces in the mouth. It is what the palate feels rather than what the nose smells or the tongue tastes. In wine sensory science, mouthfeel includes sensations such as fullness, heat, viscosity, drying, roughness, and astringency. These sensations are shaped by alcohol, acidity, sugar, carbon dioxide, polysaccharides, and phenolic compounds. Phenolic compounds are a broad group of grape-derived molecules that include tannins, color pigments, and some compounds connected to flavor and bitterness. They play an especially important role in red wine texture because they influence color, bitterness, astringency, and structure. This matters because two wines can have similar aromas and flavors but feel completely different. One can be lean and brisk. Another can be round and coating. One can be soft and polished. Another can be firm, drying, and angular. Those differences come from chemistry, structure, winemaking choices, and even how the wine is served. Let's start with body, because it is one of the most common texture words in wine. We often describe wines as light-bodied, medium-bodied, or full-bodied. But body is not one single compound. It is a sensory impression created by several components working together. Alcohol contributes to body. Residual sugar can increase body. Dissolved solids and extract can contribute. Acidity can make a wine feel lighter or sharper. Aroma and flavor intensity can even influence how full a wine seems, because perception is rarely as tidy as a textbook diagram. Ethanol is especially important. Higher alcohol can increase the perception of body, viscosity, and warmth, although the effect depends on the wine. Glycerol is produced during fermentation, and for years it has been casually credited with giving wine richness and body. It does contribute to viscosity in simple solutions, but at the concentrations normally found in wine, its sensory impact is usually smaller than many people assume. So, when a wine feels full and rounded, glycerol may be present, but it is rarely the whole explanation. Now let's move to acidity. Acidity is technically a taste because sourness is detected by taste buds, but acidity also changes the physical impression of wine. A wine with higher acidity often feels sharper, fresher, more linear, and more mouth-watering. In white wines, acidity can define the entire palate structure. In sparkling wines, acidity and carbon dioxide work together to create brightness, tension, and refreshment. Acidity can also interact with texture. Lower pH and higher acidity can make some wines feel more angular or more astringent, depending on the tannin level and the rest of the wine. This is why texture is better understood as a system rather than a list of separate components. Now we need to talk about tannins, because tannins are central to red wine texture. Tannins are phenolic compounds that come mainly from grape skins, seeds, and stems, and sometimes from oak. In red wines, tannins matter because red wine making usually involves fermenting the juice with skins and seeds. That contact allows color, flavor compounds, and tannins to move into the wine. Tannins are responsible for much of what we describe as grip, dryness, firmness, or roughness in red wine. This sensation is called astringency. Astringency is often discussed alongside bitterness, but they are not the same thing. Bitterness is a taste. Astringency is a tactile sensation. It is the drying, puckering, or rough feeling that appears on the gums, tongue, and cheeks. The classic explanation is that tannins interact with proteins in saliva. Saliva normally lubricates the mouth. When tannins bind with salivary proteins, that lubrication can be reduced, creating a drying or rough sensation. Current research shows that astringency is more complex than one simple tannin-protein reaction. Oral surfaces, saliva composition, tannin structure, and wine matrix all matter. But, for practical purposes, tannins change how lubricated the mouth feels. And tannin texture is not one-dimensional. Wine professionals may describe tannins as coarse, fine-grained, chalky, dusty, velvety, hard, green, drying, silky, or chewy. These words are sensory approximations, but they are trying to describe real differences in how the wine feels. For consumers, the important point is simple. Not all tannins feel the same. Some tannins are small and sharp-feeling. Others are larger or better integrated and may feel smoother or more rounded. Scientists describe these differences by looking at tannin structure, but you do not need the chemistry vocabulary to notice the result. A wine can have firm tannins that feel pleasant and well-shaped. Another wine can have tannins that feel harsh, bitter, or rough. Grape ripeness matters too. If the skins and seeds are less mature, the tannins may feel greener, harsher, or more bitter. If the grapes are riper, the tannins often feel rounder and better integrated, although this depends on the grape variety, vineyard conditions, and wine style. Winemaking choices make a major difference. Red wines get much of their color, flavor, and tannin from contact with the grape skins and seeds during fermentation. This process is called maceration. A short, gentle maceration usually gives a wine softer texture and less grip. A longer or more intense maceration can extract more tannin and color, which may give the wine more structure, but can also make it feel more drying or bitter if not managed carefully. Seeds are especially important because seed tannins can taste more bitter and feel more astringent than skin tannins. This is why winemakers pay attention to how hard they mix the fermenting wine, how long the wine stays on the skins, and when they press the wine away from the solids. Pressing also affects texture. After fermentation, the free-running wine drains off first. This portion is often softer. Then the remaining skins and seeds can be pressed to recover more wine. These later press fractions may contain more tannin and other phenolic compounds. Press wine can add useful structure, but too much can make a wine feel rough or overly drying. Oak and oxygen can also change how tannins feel. Oak can add its own tannins, especially when the barrel is new. Oak can also contribute flavors such as vanilla, spice, toast, clove, smoke, or coconut, depending on the oak species, origin, seasoning, toasting, and contact time. Small, controlled amounts of oxygen during aging can help tannins become better integrated. Over time, Tannins may feel less aggressive and more polished, but too much oxygen can damage the wine, so this has to be carefully managed. This is one reason red wine texture depends so strongly on winemaking decisions. The grape provides the raw material, but the winemaker shapes how firm, smooth, grippy, soft, or drying the final wine will feel. Now let's shift to another group of compounds that can influence texture: polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are larger carbohydrate molecules found in grapes, yeast, and sometimes produced by microbes. In wine, they can influence mouthfeel, astringency, viscosity, and heat perception. Some of the most discussed are manoproteins, which come from yeast cell walls. These can be released during fermentation and during aging on lees. Lees are the spent yeast cells and other particles that settle after fermentation. When wine ages on lees, yeast cells gradually break down and release compounds into the wine. This can contribute to a rounder or creamier palate in some wines. It can also influence stability and interact with phenolic compounds. Manoproteins can modify the mouthfeel and structural properties of wines, including astringency-related perceptions, although the effect depends on the wine and the type of manoprotein. This is why lees aging is often used in wines where a fuller or creamier texture is desired, such as some Chardonnay, traditional method sparkling wines, and certain white or rosé styles. But it is not automatic. Lees contact can be beneficial, neutral, or problematic, depending on the quality of the lees, oxygen exposure, sulfur dioxide management, microbial stability, and wine style. For white wines, texture often lives in the balance between acidity, alcohol, phenolics, polysaccharides, residual sugar, and carbon dioxide. A dry Riesling may feel light and sharp because of high acidity and lower alcohol. A barrel-fermented Chardonnay may feel broader because of alcohol, lees contact, malolactic fermentation, oak, and lower perceived acidity. A skin contact white may carry a phenolic grip closer to a light red wine. None of these textures is automatically better. The question is whether the texture fits the style. Malolactic fermentation can also change mouthfeel. During malolactic fermentation, lactic acid bacteria convert malic acid into lactic acid. Malic acid is commonly associated with a sharper acid impression, while lactic acid is generally perceived as softer. The process can reduce total acidity and shift the sensory profile toward a rounder impression. Malolactic fermentation can also affect aroma and flavor, including the possible production of diacetyl, which is associated with buttery notes. The level of diacetyl depends on bacterial strain, wine chemistry, oxygen exposure, and sulfur dioxide timing. But the main texture effect comes from the change in acid profile and the reduction in sharpness. This is why malolactic fermentation is common in many red wines and in some fuller-bodied white wines, but is often avoided in crisp white wines where freshness and sharp acidity are part of the desired style. Residual sugar is another powerful texture tool. Even small amounts can soften acidity, increase body, and make the palate feel rounder. This is common in many balanced white wines where the wine does not taste obviously sweet, but the sugar helps counter acidity or bitterness. In dessert wines, sugar becomes a major structural component, increasing viscosity and palate weight. Carbon dioxide is texture in motion. In sparkling wines, carbon dioxide creates bubbles, foam, pressure, and prickling. In still wines, small amounts of dissolved carbon dioxide can make a wine feel fresher or more lifted. Too much carbon dioxide in a wine that is meant to be still can make it feel sharp, spritzy, or unsettled. Too little carbon dioxide in a fresh white or rosé can make it feel flat. Now, let's talk about balance. In mouthfeel, balance does not mean that every component is equal. A high-acid sparkling wine should not feel like a low-acid Merlot. A structured Cabernet Sauvignon should not feel like Pinot Grigio. Balance means that the tactile elements support the intended style. Acidity can make sweetness feel refreshing. Sugar can make acidity feel less severe. Tannin can give red wine shape and aging potential. Alcohol can contribute body, but too much can create heat. Polysaccharides can soften edges, but they cannot rescue a wine whose structure is fundamentally out of place. For winemakers, this means texture has to be built from vineyard to bottle. Grape maturity matters because skins, seeds, acids, sugars, and phenolics change during ripening. Harvest decisions affect acidity, potential alcohol, tannin maturity, and flavor development. In the winery, maceration choices affect tannin extraction. Pressing decisions affect phenolic load. Fermentation temperature, yeast strain, lees management, malolactic fermentation, oak use, blending, stabilization, and filtration can all influence mouthfeel. Filtration deserves a brief mention because it sometimes gets blamed for stripping texture. Filtration can affect wine composition if poorly chosen or poorly managed, especially if a wine is pushed through an inappropriate medium or if colloidal material is removed aggressively. But sound filtration, matched to wine condition and stability goals, is a normal part of quality winemaking. The goal is not to avoid filtration at all costs. The goal is to use the right tool for the wine. For tasters, mouthfeel is easier to understand when we slow down and separate sensations. When you taste, ask, how heavy does the wine feel? Is the acidity sharp, soft, or balanced? Is there heat from alcohol? Does the wine dry the gums or cheeks? Are the tannins coarse, fine, hard, or smooth? Does the palate feel thin, round, creamy, grippy, prickly, or oily? Does the finish dry out, fade quickly, or remain structured? And one practical tip. Pay attention after you swallow or spit. Astringency often builds over repeated sips. The first taste may seem moderate, while the third or fourth sip reveals more drying. That cumulative effect is part of why structured red wines behave differently at the table than they do in a quick tasting. Food changes mouthfeel too. Protein, fat, salt, and acidity in food can alter how wine texture is perceived. A tannic red wine may feel softer with protein-rich foods because tannins can interact with food proteins and fats as well as saliva. High-acid wines can feel refreshing with rich foods because acidity helps counter fat and reset the palate. This is one reason wine pairing is as much about structure as flavor matching. Serving conditions also change the way a wine feels. Sometimes the difference between a wine that seems sharp, heavy, closed, or beautifully balanced is not the wine itself, but the way it was served. Two things matter especially here: temperature and air. Let's start with temperature because we have all met a wine at the wrong temperature. A white wine served straight from a very cold refrigerator can seem crisp at first, but if it's too cold, it may also feel hard, thin, and muted. The aromas hide, the texture tightens. The wine may still be perfectly good, but it is not showing much of itself yet. As that same wine warms slightly in the glass, it often begins to change. The aromas become easier to smell. The palate can feel rounder. A Chardonnay that seemed flat and severe at refrigerator temperature may begin to show more body. A Riesling or Sauvignon Blanc may still need to be cool, but not so cold that all you taste is acidity. Red wines have the opposite problem more often. We are told to serve red wine at room temperature, but modern room temperature can be much warmer than the cool rooms where that advice originally made sense. A full-bodied red served too warm can feel heavy, alcoholic, and tiring. The tannins may seem rougher, the alcohol more obvious, and the finish less fresh. A slight chill can do wonderful things for many red wines. A lighter red, such as Pinot Noir, Gamay, or some young Tempranillo, can feel brighter and more refreshing after 20 or 30 minutes in the refrigerator. Even fuller-bodied reds often show better when they are slightly cooler than a warm dining room. The fruit feels clearer, the alcohol feels less dominant, and the structure can feel more balanced. The point is not to follow rigid rules. It is to pay attention. If a white wine feels too sharp and closed, let it warm a little in the glass. If a red wine feels heavy or hot, cool it down slightly. Temperature does not change the wine's chemistry in a permanent way, but it does change how your mouth and nose perceive it. Cold can reduce aroma release and make acidity feel more prominent. Warmth can make aroma more expressive, but it can also make alcohol stand out. And then there is air. Opening a bottle is not always the same as letting a wine breathe. A small opening at the neck of the bottle gives the wine only limited contact with oxygen. Decanting, on the other hand, means pouring the wine into another vessel where more of the wine is exposed to air. Sometimes we decant to remove sediment, especially in older red wines. Sometimes we decant because a wine feels tight, closed, or severe when first opened. Think of a young, structured red wine. You pour a glass, and at first it feels a little clenched. The aromas are there, but they are not very expressive. The tannins feel firm. The wine seems to be holding something back. After 30 minutes in a decanter, the wine may feel different. The tannins have not vanished, the acidity has not changed dramatically, but the wine may seem more integrated because the aromas are more open, some volatile compounds have shifted, and your perception of the structure has changed. This is especially useful for young red wines with a lot of tannin and concentration. Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Nebbiolo, Tempranillo, Bordeaux-style blends, and similar wines. A little air can help them feel more generous and less severe. Aeration can also help some wines with reductive aromas. These are sulfur-related notes that may smell like struck match, rubber, cabbage, or something closed and slightly funky. Some of these aromas can decrease with air exposure. Others will not. Decanting can help, but it is not a miracle cure. Older wines require more care. An older red may need decanting because it has sediment. In that case, the goal is to pour gently and leave the sediment behind. But older wines can be fragile. Too much air can make them fade quickly. A wine that has spent decades aging in a bottle does not always want to be splashed around for 2 hours before dinner. Sometimes it needs a gentle decant shortly before serving, and then your full attention. And not every wine needs a decanter. Fresh whites, delicate aromatic wines, rosés, light reds, and sparkling wines are often best served directly from the bottle. Too much air can make them feel flatter or less fresh. A delicate wine does not need a dramatic entrance. The easiest approach is to taste first. Pour a small glass. Smell it, taste it. Ask yourself, does it feel closed, tight, overly tannic, reduced, or muted? If it does, give it some air. If it already smells beautiful and feels balanced, let it be. Wine service does not have to be ceremonial. It just has to be attentive. So, yes, texture begins with what is in the wine. Alcohol, acid, tannin, sugar, polysaccharides, carbon dioxide, and all the other structural pieces. But texture is also shaped in the moment. The same bottle can feel sharper when too cold, heavy when too warm, closed straight from the bottle, or more harmonious after some air. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for a wine is simple. Give it the right temperature, give it a little air if it needs it, and then give it enough attention to notice what changed. So, what should we remember? Wine texture is chemistry translated into touch. Alcohol, acid, tannin, sugar, polysaccharides, dissolved carbon dioxide, extract, temperature, and time all shape how wine feels. Some of these components are measurable in the lab. Some require trained sensory evaluation. The most useful understanding comes from connecting both. A wine's texture can make it feel precise, generous, polished, energetic, or tired. It can support aroma and flavor, or it can get in the way. It can make a wine easy to drink, memorable to taste, or difficult to finish. And for winemakers, texture is one of the clearest reminders that wine is a sensory system. Every decision changes the way the wine moves across the palate. So the next time you taste a wine, spend a few seconds with the part of the experience that has no aroma wheel. Notice the weight, the grip, the freshness, the finish. Notice what the wine asks your mouth to do. And then, because this is still wine and not a laboratory exam, taste something delicious. Share it with someone who enjoys asking questions and appreciate the details that make each style distinct. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future topics. You can find my email address on the podcast website page. And of course, buy the wines you are curious about. Taste them thoughtfully, share them generously, and pay attention to their texture as much as their flavor. Until next time, this has been the Wine Lab. Stay curious. Cheers.